So my name is Agnieszka Halemba. I am a social anthropologist. At the moment, at present, when you see me, I am in Potsdam, in Germany, but I work mainly at the University of Warsaw Institute of Ethnology and Cultural Anthropology. The book about which we will be talking today actually stems from my previous project, which was done at the University of Leipzig in Germany. And it concerns the recent apparition of the Virgin Mary, which happened up to the present day in Transcarpathian Ukraine. So the book concerns the Virgin Mary apparitions. Apparitions are within the Catholic religiosity. There are so-called private revelation. It means that you have a public revelation, everything which is written in the New and Old Testament. And from the point of view of the Church, this is the final word of God, which we could interpret and live according to this, but nothing new really will be given to us. Everything is in there. But throughout the history of Christianity, and since the split in Christianity as well, first with the Orthodoxy and then with Protestantism, especially in the Catholic Christianity, there are these moments of the private meetings with messengers of God, which people meet. Sometimes they hear them only, sometimes they feel their presence, sometimes they can see them. And what I was researching was one of those apparitions, which means a situation when, in this case, two little girls met a woman which looked a little bit different than the usual person in this region. This was in Dzhublyk. This is it used to be a small meadow, a small spring, a small, place between two villages in Transcarpathian Ukraine next to Irshava, which is one of the sort of medium-sized cities in Transcarpathia, a part of Ukraine. And they met the Virgin Mary first time in 2002 on the 27th of August, while actually collecting the water from the spring. And since then, a lot of happened around this apparition site. A lot of happened. The girls were still meeting the Virgin Mary. There are still further visions. But what interested me most in this book is how in the political and social situation in Transcarpathia and in Ukraine in general, how this apparition served as on the one hand, a window through which we could look at what is important for the people. Virgin Mary during apparitions, Catholic apparitions, she usually, at least since the middle of the 19th century, she talks a lot. She gives messages. And I assumed that if the Virgin Mary talks, it means that she talks about things which are important to the people. And this is absolutely independent from the fact if you believe in apparitions or not. Actually, as a Catholic, you are not obliged to believe in apparitions. It's absolutely not a part of the doctrine. Even the apparitions, like maybe you have heard about Fatima on Lourdes, the big or even Guadalupe in Mexico. Even if they are accepted by the Church, you can, as a Catholic believer, say, well, I don't care. Basically, I don't believe that she came, and you are still okay. It's not a sin or anything bad to say things like this. So, but still, I assume that if there are messages of the Virgin Mary, so even if you believe that she came, she probably cares for the people. So she talks to them about things which are important to them. And if you don't believe, then you can assume that basically this is a social phenomenon in which some issues which are important for the people are being discussed. And this is what I assumed about the apparition in Dzhublyk, which actually, in my opinion, it is like this. You can imagine that the Catholic Church sees itself or herself as the main mediator between the God and the people. And here you have a situation that a person who is absolutely not prepared to this role, so it's not a priest, it's not a nun. Usually, since the mid-19th century, these are mostly children or women who also have not the main position in the church, one can say, they say, okay, I met the Virgin Mary and she says this or that. So this is one aspect of this. Another aspect of this is that for many years miracles and things of this kind, they are not, I would say, with the discussions between the church and certain modern trends, church has chosen not to underline such things. You know, these are two challenges probably for the modern mind, and church has to exist in this world as we have it. So these are definitely moments when which are not easy for the church as an organization. And usually, if you analyze the apparition cases throughout the world, usually they are supported by monastic orders. And monastic orders are a special case within the Catholic structure. They are kind of course, dependent on the Pope and the Vatican, but they have other hierarchy. And in very many situations, when there are situations of conflicts and there are disagreements within the church, apparitions are used as sort of moments in which you can once again discuss this, bring it to the public attention, that we have such an unresolved issue. Here the situation is a little bit, well, maybe not more complicated, but specific, because it is an Eastern Rite Catholic Church, so minority Catholicism, I would say. I mean, Roman Catholic is the main Catholic Church. These are the Eastern Rite Catholics. There are two Greek Catholic churches in Ukraine at present. Historically, they go back to the two unions with Vatican, which were signed with two groups of Orthodox bishops and believers. One was at the end of the 16th century, the other one is in the middle of the 17th century. I am talking about the Union of Brest and the Union of Uzhorod. And until this day, actually there are two Greek Catholic structures which resulted as this union, which resulted from this union. The union basically said that you can follow your Orthodox liturgy in terms of practice, in terms of Eastern liturgy, basically, yes, but you are administratively you are part of the Catholic Church, right? And from this point, you have two traditions of Greek Catholicism in Ukraine. One is the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, which is basically in western Ukraine up to the Carpathian Mountains, north from the Carpathians. And there is the Mukachevo Greek Catholic Eparchy, which is south to the Carpathians. And this, because of the political history of the whole region, these churches have a very different history and meaning for the people. While Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, as you probably all know, has been a site of developing actually and sustaining Ukrainian national identity and pride. You cannot say this about the Mukachevo Greek Catholic Eparchy. It had completely different history. It was to some extent Majorized at the beginning of the 20th century, and then, well, it doesn't have this Ukrainian character as an eparchy, right? So, when in the Soviet times of the Greek Catholic Church was illegal, so it was delegalized by the Soviet powers, and when in 1991 there was a discussion in Vatican about how the future of the Greek Catholicism should look in Ukraine, there were these two options, two factions within the church that met there. One was arguing for the unification of the Greek Catholic Church in Ukraine. So in one country, in one independent Ukraine, we should have one Greek Catholic Church with a seat in Kiev or Lviv. Was open to negotiations. And the other option was arguing, no, Transcarpathia is so much specific culturally and historically, also in terms of liturgical practice, that we want to keep a separate church structure from Transcarpathia, the Mukachevo Greek Catholic Eparchy. And the second option won. So at the moment we have the two churches. There were apparitions during the Soviet times, like in Grushiv, but in Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, so basically on the northern side of the Carpathians. In Seredne, it was also apparitions, and it was huge religious movement in the Soviet times. But and also after Dzhublyk, there were now again until now there is a apparition site in Lishnya. I think the apparitions are going on. It happened. They started to happen after Dzhublyk. Ternopil is also a site of apparitions, I think. So far as I remember at the moment, but I think if I had more time, I would think more. And also in neighboring countries, Slovakia, for example, happens quite often. The region. Some apparition places, there were thousands of apparitions since the beginning of Christianity. And some of the places are forgotten. Some of the places are kind of built into word basilicas. And some of these places are, smaller, a little chapel, a little cross, a little statue of the Virgin Mary, or things like this, like an icon. And they are very, very different. And Dzhublyk, the apparition I'm talking about, is very specific with regard to other apparitions in Ukraine, which happened. Let us focus on those which happened after 1990 or 91, because it's huge. It grew. It's a huge pilgrimage place at the moment. So basically, from the point of view of those who support it, it's very successful. It gathers a lot of pilgrims, and it's not anymore a small meadow in between the woods, but a huge pilgrimage place, and it happened very quickly. There was, for example, what concerns the way in which the apparitions are assessed for their veracity by the church. So after talking to many people in the bishopry and also members of the commission, maybe it sounds to me obvious now, but I realized that they don't care really. It's not to establish if the apparition happened or not. The goal of the commission is to establish if it gives a good fruit to the church and to the people. So basically, it's not this all parts of the commission work. In case of Dzhublyk, when they interviewed the visionaries and look at this and kind of talk to psychologists, it's really not that important. And this is the reason why most of the known apparition cases, Catholic apparition cases, have a status of under investigation, because actually this is the church wants to have as much time as possible to look if it can manage what happens at the sites. The sites are, I think that Dzhublyk and other apparition sites are huge sites of religious experimentation, when not only the people out of their own initiative, but also church and the clergy and the functionaries, they can try on different kinds of devotion and prayers and see what works and how this influence people, how this influence their, being religious, feeling, well-being. I'm not saying this as a critique, actually. I'm saying just that actually this is totally, if you think about it, it's totally theologically okay, and the fruits are important, right? But it really surprised me that it's not about establishing was the Virgin Mary there on this day or not. It is about what I am doing, in a sense. It's about social effects of the apparitions. It is, but it's also this line in my title also refers, of course, to the discussions on Ukrainian identity, which are of which this apparition site is a very, very strong expression. So on one side, yes, politics of religion in the church, sort of management. On the other side, the politics of the Ukrainian national identity. Basically, it is about, as I told before, Transcarpathia has a very complex relations to Ukraine in terms of identity of its inhabitants, right? And for many people, especially for people who have deep relations to Ukraine as a state and as a nation, and many people who came to Transcarpathia from other parts of Ukraine, like from Galicia, for example, but not only, also people who were born in Transcarpathia, but they were brought up in families who actually were devoted to Ukrainian national feelings and identity. The situation in Transcarpathia, where the specificity of the region is underlined all the time, and especially the Mukhachevo Catholic Eparchy, which is not united with the rest of Ukraine. Yeah, it's a problem. So many people, it's a problem. The many clergy of this, as I call it, the pro-Ukrainian inclination, they were telling it, this is a problem. This cannot happen. Look at the policies in other states, Vatican policies. Usually, you have a Polish Catholic Church, not a Polish, but one structure of the Catholic Church in Poland and one structure of the Catholic Church in other countries. And in Ukraine, you have two. And this they don't like. And this apparition expressed these kinds of feelings as well, very, very strongly. It's, for example, Church Slavonic is used in many churches in Transcarpathia, but at Dzhublyk there is only Ukrainian during liturgy. The embroidery which is used by the priests, the symbolic, the yellow and blue and the colors and everything, this is also the involvement of Dzhublyk in recent political events was very, very visible. And also like material science, and as I'm writing there about this was for me also a surprise, that one can build a 300-kilometer long stations of the crossroad, and they built it between Lviv and Dzhublyk, just to show very, very explicitly where Transcarpathia belongs. Because of course in Transcarpathia, although there are all the time voices that, well, not really very maybe serious, not really taken to the conclusions, political conclusions, but there are, the Hungarians built some monument, then there is some other thing, and in the situation of Ukraine, when there are problems, or we know itself, there are problems with that this country has because of Russia, but because of the complex history of different regions. Such a situation is for people seen as dangerous and a little bit like, and this was probably this apparition also was a way to express this kind of feeling. I don't think that for many clergy people, apparitions are a big problem. No, they are for them a problem, but they are not a big thing they would spend a lot of time thinking about. They are just, for them, this is just a phenomenon of mass religion for a little bit, for people who are maybe, this is kind of simpletons, say. I mean, this is what many clergy think. But, and they see it as a problem in a sense. Okay, we have to manage this somehow. We understand that people want it, but, so I don't think that maybe there is enough attention to this given on the part of the church. I'm just saying that because I talked, for example, I had a very interesting conversation with the exorcist of the Mukhachevo Catholic Eparchy, and he noticed that actually he is from Poland, so he has also because if it was a Greek Catholic exorcist, I would say, there was Soviet times, so he cannot talk much about the formal education. But he said that actually there was so little in Catholic Church attention given to such things as apparitions, miracles, also the working of the devil, all these things which were by the modern society marked sort of as irrational in the education of priests, that they don't know how to deal with it that much. So it changed with John Paul II, because he, for example, introduced this obligation for an exorcist in each bishopric. I mean, each bishop has to have an exorcist now, because he kind of, I think, he thought himself that this is a real phenomenon. It can be a gift, for example, an apparition. Yes, he was also a fan of Fatima, for example. So he was a fan of many apparitions. So it changes, but it changes not only according, you cannot easily say, this priest sees it like this and that like that. There are also other things. For example, in which period was he trained? Where was he trained? What was being taught about it in the seminary? So it's a quite complicated question. Yeah, I spoke with I started just, anthropology always starts. First, we just walk around and talk to everyone for the first few months. Basically try to figure out at all about, didn't have a clue what is happening there and how big it will be, and or that it is about the Ukrainian national identity, for example, or that there is some problems with authority of the priests, because so basically you talk, and then I was staying in Irszawa and in Nizhne Bolotne, and I tried to talk to everybody, but then I planned interviews. These were interviews with all the priests from the Irszawa deanery. I spent quite a lot of time in the seminary in Uzhorod, trying to interview the historians, but also members of the commission, but they cannot tell me much. It's sort of, investigation is not open, but it's why sometimes we kind of just hang around, because you can hear some things and have informal talks during tea breaks. I interviewed once only Bishop Milan Shashik and some Galician bishops about it. So I must say that I was very pleasantly surprised that it was so easy to work with priests in Ukraine, and they were so open, and they were telling me a lot of things, really, and quite open, and transparency is a part of this church, I think, to some extent. I didn't have the same experience in Slovakia, for example. It was much more difficult. I tried. The book was directed towards understanding what happens towards understanding two things. What are the apparitions, basically, and what can their research tell us about the social life, and how they should be researched. So because actually until the previous works, there are some anthropologies of apparitions already, in other parts of the world. But mostly they were focused on the visions themselves, sort of on this event, of this experience of meeting the God and the divine. And I just thought, well, can you use them in different ways, as a tools, as entry points to understanding what is their role in organizing religion. So basically, you see, we use the term religion without much thinking what it means, but it can mean very different things. On one hand, religion is your experience, yeah. On the other hand, these are social rituals which you are doing, which they don't have to do anything with any sort of religious organizations. There can be, your family rituals, which are also somehow religious. And also there is religion as a religious organizations. And I think that the interesting questions is what happens when, for example, the religious experiences meet with religious organizations, and how religious organization, which is the organization of this world in the sense, yeah, about power and relations with people, what does it have to do with the experiences in order to manage them somehow? And the other thing is more related to the history of Soviet socialism on one hand, and Ukraine in particular, and this region in particular. So, for example, there are historical parts which I think are quite important in this book. For example, the part when I argue that actually this was the underground time, so underground existence of the Greek Catholic Church, when the Ukrainian identity at all appeared strongly in Transcarpathia. So you see, sort of historical research to the development of the identity of the people there. It has a theoretical dimension which I tried to explain. Basically, how should we research religion? So I think that religious organizations have really a very difficult job at keeping the emotions and the feelings of the people in some framework. And this is what organized religion is about. This is one message. The second most important thing actually is something which we haven't talked about today, but maybe we don't have time anymore. We have to more carefully think about what happens in some parts of the post-Soviet space and why, with regard both to religion and to national identity. In terms of religion, my general conclusion, but it's not only from this work, but of my previous works in Siberia and so on, that actually, surprisingly enough, the Soviet Union was the space where the religious feeling, so the feeling that there is something occult there, there is something beyond the everyday human experience, yes, has not diminished among people during the Soviet times, but quite the opposite. It just got bigger. Everybody feels it. It's just so much different than my experience here in Eastern Germany where I live. Yeah, it's very different. And at the same time, the Soviet attitude towards religious organization actually made them a little bit weaker. And the 90s, this is the time, and the 90s and up to now, actually, this is the time when religious organization try somehow to manage, to get hold, to negotiate being within this field of intense experience of religiosity. You asked me a question before, are the people religious there? Yes, they are. I mean, but in the sense, not they go to church, but they feel that there is something important in life beyond immediate level. So, and my thing is that the Soviet, actually the Soviet time was furthering this feeling, surprisingly. Yeah, I would like to see more study in this area of the world. There is some study. I think there are more people coming and doing research, and good research on religion I always welcome. Thank you for taking your time and listening. Thanks a lot.